Welcome to Informed by Alan Roebke this August 31st, 2018. We've got some breaking news on the subject of ethanol for all you ethanol investors in southern Minnesota and northern Iowa that have access to this program, as well as all the corn growers and the taxpayer that pay subsidies or use gasoline and burn 10% ethanol in their vehicles in this region and basically all over the country today. And what we're going to talk about is that Ag Secretary Sonny Perdue was in Iowa at the Farm Progress Show where Lynn Kettleson was at and other farm broadcasters. I'm sure the Brownfield Network was there, as well as the Red River Valley Farm Network. And he was there and made the announcement that President Trump says, I want E15 done now. Ethanol at a 15% level rather than a 10, what it is right now all over Minnesota and most of the country. He wants that done right now. And it was a typical political approach to ethanol that Sonny Perdue was there from the Corn Growers. The article by Chris Clayton of DTN that I'm referencing shows that he was at a rally which would have been for E15. And so as I read this and prepare for a program for this weekend, I'm thinking, well, first of all, the president doesn't have a Secretary of Agriculture that's giving him sound advice for what really should be done with ethanol. Now, years ago, all of us ethanol investors were told, well, there's never enough corn or never enough capacity to put 10% ethanol in all the gasoline. Well, that was proven very wrong. And now when he says we want 15%, I'm going to tell you, yes, we could do it over a number of years if we increase the capacity of corn ethanol production in the United States by 50%, because that's what it would take. And I don't think that's a wise use of our corn supply or a sound energy policy, because what I'm for is we need to go to electric cars or hybrid vehicles and get away from burning all this gasoline. Future generations are going to need this crude oil for the other properties they have rather than simply burning it in a vehicle. And of course our economy has to figure out how we're going to handle that when we don't stop at a convenience store and pump gas all the time. But what we want to focus on today, some breaking news for you ethanol investors, is when Trump told the farmers and reported in ag press and probably very limited in the general press. Why? Because they've been talking about this E15 for probably a decade or more, and it's not happened. We've got a farm bill sitting waiting for the Conferees to come back to Washington to pass the 2018 Farm Bill. And what I'm proposing you today, rather than go to E15 like the corn growers and Secretary Perdue President Trump is asking for, we simply go to that 12%. We start out immediately with either my attachment, the REB-Key attachment to the 2018 Farm Bill that says we immediately go to 11%, or have the president make an executive order and then get to E12 and leave it there. And when I thought about this and reading and hearing some other news reports, I'm thinking, for this week's program, most ag sources or rural sources were talking about these subsidies that Trump is handing out to soybeans, and we might have time to get to that. We'll see. But the real important one is this, because I start thinking, and I thought, I've got to call the Renewable Fuels Association. I put my old specs on. That light is terrible in here today. And here's what I did. I called the Renewable Fuels Association, and I talked to Rachel there, their PR person, and immediately I could sense that first she said, I've never heard of you, and talking to me for 2 minutes. Those people always automatically know I'm not an English major. I'm not one of them, and they just don't like to deal with people like me. But anyway, I write back after talking here. Thanks for talking to me, Rachel. I don't see the expansion numbers for ethanol on your website. Can you email them to me? If the Renewable Fuel Association does a press release on Secretary Perdue's call for 15% now, please email me the copy. And then I also included last week's program here on Informed by Alan Roebke. Then listen to this program heard in southern Minnesota and northern Iowa last week, and please forward to all your association members to read and view video. I'm about to do another one of this weekend, which we're in the process of doing right now. And so then I went to the website that she was talking about, and we talked last week about the additional bushels of corn that I said if we just went to 11 or 12%, the price of corn automatically goes to $4 a bushel. You don't need my increase in loan rates. And she gave me numbers showing what the USDA, I'm sure, is using, because they said the Renewable Fuel Association has just did a call to all the ethanol plants to see what their capacity is and what they're operating at. And she directed me on their website, and it showed that annual production for all the corn-based ethanol and a few cellulosic ones, as well as some byproducts of a few different products, whether it's milk or and so on. She said that the annual production is capacity is 16,311,000,000 gallons annually, but the capacity that we're pumping out right now is 15,825,000, and it also shows in there that there is expansion or improvements to various ethanol plants around the country of another 442 million gallons annually, which would bring our ability to produce over about 16 billion, would produce that 16,311 billion gallons, 16,311,000,000. But I thought, that's not enough for my listeners of Informed by Alan Roebke in southern Minnesota that are always concerned about what we can do to make rural America stronger and to cut taxes and to have policies that just take care of themselves, like sugar policy that I sold to Tip O'Neill over 30 years ago, and you can see that on last week's program if you just Google Informed TV channel, Informed TV channel, and you can watch last week's program if you missed it. And it turns out I am pretty well dead on in everything I said there. But I was sitting here this morning and I sent Rachel another email, and she replied back to me that she wasn't in until next Tuesday. And so I thought, yeah, I'm just going to call the Renewable Fuels Association. There must be somebody there on this Friday leading up to the Labor Day weekend. And so I sent an email to the head of it, Bob, I'm trying to don't have his name right in front of me, Deneen, I think it is, something like that. Here's what I wrote to the Renewable Fuel Association this Friday, the 31st. I said, Trump is calling for a 15% blend at the pump. If that would suddenly happen, and I parenthesize, yes, I know we don't have present capacity to do that, how much more corn is needed annually, says the Renewable Fuel Association. So you kind listeners or viewers out there watching this, I do my research and I want to be on the air to give other meaningful people an opportunity to express themselves, such as the Renewable Fuel Association, that most of the POET plants as well as the independent cooperative plants like Heartland there at Winthrop and all across southern Minnesota. And then I wrote, then if we did what I'm calling for a simple, immediate move of 10% at the pump to 11%, and then to 12% at the pump, and basically calling good. When supplies are available, does the Renewable Fuel Association say that how much additional corn is needed for each 1% increase from the present 10% to 11 or 12? And then I asked them, are you using 2.81 gallons of ethanol for every bushel of corn processed? And I just want to remind you, there's still about 18 pounds of a 56 bushel of corn that's still available for feed. It's a high protein feed. So the value of the corn, there's still value left even after we make ethanol, just making that point. But the thing I want you to think about as you're listening to this program is, what if we do forget about Trump, forget about the corn growers, forget about the politics of Sonny Perdue and Farm Bureau and Farmers Union and all them, and just say, let's focus on one thing like REB-Key is doing, that we just go up 1%. What does that do? If we change all those pumps all over the United States now, people, and go to 11% and 12. In fact, in Minnesota and northern Iowa, or Iowa and upper Midwest, we could easily go to 12 right away, which we should do, and let the other parts of the country catch up. And in my tenacity and belligerentness, I thought, when I sent this to Bob, the head of the deal, I talked to him actually this morning, and for a second I really appreciate him picking up the phone, and I said, well, Al, I'm in a meeting, and to be honest with you, I'm not a numbers guy, because I said, well, just pop off a couple numbers for you. And I tell you what, he said, I'll send you that, and I said, thank you, that's all I can ask. You have no pre-warning for this. And so I hung up the phone, and then I'm thinking, on their website, I think they had a St. Louis office as well, so I look on their website, and here they've got a chief economist. So I thought, Bob's probably busy this morning, and I'm going to send this email to Bob of the same thing. What if we went from 10% to 12%, and what would it, how much more corn would we use if we went for each 1% increase at the pump? Rather than 10%, we go to 11 or 12%. And he was kind enough to send this email back to me, and he said this: Alan, while I could do a more thorough set of calculations in response to your question during our phone conversation, you mentioned being on a deadline in about 15 minutes. So here's my rapid response, and I really appreciate that. I think it's a good response. He writes this to Alan Roebke and the viewers of Informed by Alan Roebke. And he writes, in the current situation, we basically have E10 nationwide. And the statistics that Rachel had me look up on their website of the Renewable Fuel Association, RFA, they go by .org or something like that, is resulting in 4.97 billion bushel of corn demand. He's saying 5 billion bushel. And we talked last week's program, we got E30, E85, the USDA in their WASDE August report said we're going to use 5,625 million bushel of this year's 14.6 billion bushel crop to produce back again this 15 plus billion gallons of ethanol that our plants are turning out annually right now. And so now we're getting some sound, reasonable numbers from the Renewable Fuel Association. So he writes this: total gallons, E85, were referencing of gasoline that we use about 143 billion gallons a year, and with the 10% portion of ethanol that we use, that leads to 14 billion 157, he writes to me, or in other words, just about 5 billion bushel of corn. Then he's kind enough to write, if E15 were allowed year-round and fully adapted overnight nationwide, which Trump is calling for, then simply adding 50% to the number above would bring corn usage to 7.45 billion bushel, an increase of 2,048,000,000 over what we're presently using for E85. In other words, if we could suddenly have our plants kick out in this marketing year, which starts on the 1st of September, tomorrow, and we would suddenly need for this year of that 14.6 billion bushel corn crop, we would need 7.45 billion to do what Trump is asking for and get it done immediately. Half the corn crop, people, would go to ethanol. Just think of that. Half the corn crop would go to ethanol if we followed the politics of the corn growers and the farm organizations rather than sound energy policy and sound farm policy that Alan Roebke is talking about here on the radio today, as well as at the Informed TV channel. And then he writes, which is very important to you, my listeners, in reality, California, New York, and a few other states do not allow E15. They do not allow this. If E15 were allowed year-round and adapted overnight in the remainder of the country, it would lead to 6,094 billion bushel of corn demand, an increase of 1.97 billion bushels over E10. And why he's referencing this, people ever understand, we're just talking about not total use of ethanol or Scott the economist of the RFA. He's just saying if those labeled pumps there where everybody pulls up and puts in their tank, this is what it would take. And so we have some great news, and there's some more numbers here, but I don't want to get you totally tied up in numbers in this whole process. And so then we are going to look at a little bit more of what he said. If there were a transition to nationwide E11 overnight, which I'm talking about, that I presented to the Renewable Fuel Association, which I'm presenting to you farmers, corn growers, landowners, taxpayers, that would eliminate the need for any more subsidies on this year's crop, and actually going forward would eliminate a lot of these direct payments that some of these formulas include. And then he writes, including California and New York, this would equate to 5.5 billion bushels of corn demand. In other words, he writes, a 500 million bushel additional use of corn. And that's what I referenced in last week's program that I sent to all the farm economists, all the farm broadcasters, to the major media outlets, but they don't want to listen to a practical guy like myself. So, and what I'm saying there, if we just do that immediately, what happened? We have the plant capacity right now for Trump to do an executive order or to do what I want you to pass on to your farm groups, and that is that we do what REB-Key is calling for, the REB-Key attachment to the 2018 Farm Bill that's sitting there waiting for the conferees to come back. We immediately go to 11% and then 12% after that and call it good. And what happens then? The supply of corn in the WASDE report, we take it down to basically just a little above a carryover, I should say, a little over 1 billion bushel, which is still adequate carryover. But the reality is markets will respond to that and give our farmers a price from the marketplace that I've always called for here. And then he writes, so essentially, Alan, every 1% increase in ethanol use nationwide results in 500 million bushels of new corn demand. And he writes, I hope this helps. And this is from Scott Richmond. And great, I just talked to him for a few minutes. He was kind enough to get me back so I could do this program for this weekend. And so this is what I want my listeners, and you have to spread the word to our farm groups, the corn growers especially, and that there is a simple solution to these crashing markets that we've had because of this Trump tariff policy. And I'm pro-Trump. I mean, all his antics, no, I don't support that. But the reality, we have to support our president. I think we have to give him a Republican Congress. So see if we can get something done with North Korea and other issues we face. We cannot sit with what the Morning Joes want and the radical liberal Democrats, that the president office basically should be eliminated. We should just have the committee of the Congress and the Senate, which is ridiculous. I'm not saying they're reducing that, but they don't want the president to have any power. And what did our forefathers say? They found out early on, when you have these committees and this, there's times when things have to be done, and this is a time when things should be done. Let's go to 11% and then 12% immediately on ethanol. Why? Because the ethanol itself is trading, the 113 octane ethanol itself that's being blended with 84 and 85 octane robo-gasoline is anywhere from 70 to 80 cents a gallon cheaper. So from a standpoint of Trump making an executive order, or on the conferees of the 2018 Farm Bill adopting the REB-Key proposal, that our farm folks at the Renewable Fuels Association says, yeah, REB-Key, it's doable, and it'll use additional 500 million bushel of corn this marketing year. As the harvest starts in corn, it runs from September to the end of August 2019. So we have things in order. Now here, I also wrote back to these guys an email and to put a little pressure on them, because, you know, I have a little tenacity or a little belligerence or all of the above. So I wrote back to them, fantastic guys. Just what a real reporter and ag analyst needs to hopefully bring meaningful change to the good old USA. And when you listen to Informed by Alan Roebke, or you go to the Informed TV channel, that's what I'm all about, and want to be on TV, not on the radio, but I'll do some radio, of course. And then I write, yes, Scott, please do more as well and forward it to me as soon as possible. And then I write, have a great Labor Day weekend, guys. Alan Roebke, Informed TV and Radio. But I write a PS to put a little pressure on these good people at the Renewable Fuels Association. I say this, PS, please share this with your board, for I'm submitting my view on ethanol from 10% to 11%, then 12% as attachment to the Congressional Conferees meeting about the 2018 Farm Bill, and to Secretary Sonny Perdue. And so hopefully many of you farmers are out there, corn growers or investors in the ethanol plants in southern Minnesota and northern Iowa, where you can hear this broadcast. I want you to get a hold of Jeff Broyne at Poet, the biggest or one of the biggest independent ethanol producers, and present this presentation to him. Present this to Central Region Co-op, the biggest elevator loop where this is being broadcast. They won't send any of my emails out. In fact, I'm blocked, and I used to be one of the bigger users of the Fairfax elevator, the Hector elevator, the Buffalo Lake elevator before all this things went to move together. So all I'm saying is, can you at least ask the groups that you belong to look at what Alan Roebke is proposing, not making this massive move to 15%. Do a reasonable approach that does what? Gets you farmers a better price right away, starts using a renewable energy source that's selling cheaper than what its blend component is, or the factor that is going into this robo-gasoline. This is a no-brainer, people. Alan Roebke has always been a practical guy. Let's find a simple solution to the issues we face. And folks, this is a doable, simple solution that I'm going to approach our leaders on, and I want your help to do the same. And when I call up the corn growers of Minnesota or Iowa or the National, or Alan Giebert's brother that's head of the Illinois Farm Bureau, I want to talk to him. And I want to talk to Cliff Creighton. I want to be on the podium when Bill Nordy, Undersecretary of Ag, comes to the Big Iron Show here on the 11th. So we have somebody of substance that's been in the trenches, whether it was putting sugar policy together and representing the industry or helping them put together, but having the ability to open the door of the Speaker of the House and sell him on the proposal that we can have farm policy for no cost. And for 30 years, over 30 years, the sugar policy has worked with what? Zero cost to the taxpayer, other than some mismanagement and some forfeits of inventory in 2013. It's a no-cost program. Let me make, with my loan rate increases, as well as other things we talk about here informed by Alan Roebke, let's make the books balance. Let's cut taxes. Let's keep our system in a way that common people get a piece of the pie, not just the fat cat. So as I'm looking here in my dark studio, it looks like we're down to say thanks for listening to Informed by Alan Roebke, but you have to do something as well. Pass this message on.